Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 4th of January 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And sitting with us, we have a guest from the Netherlands. Well, outside, it's the weather's bad, Mike.
Yes.
Flooding everywhere, pretty gruesome. We're going to say our thoughts are with those people who are suffering flooding at the moment or have been flooded out over the Christmas break. Obviously, that's going to take some time to clear up. We'll just leave the weather there, I think. Well, what is 2016 going to bring? According to much of the mainstream media, at least, it's to do with peace, democracy and freedom. Is that what you're seeing, Mike?
Absolutely. We've got a Happy New Year has been sent from Saudi Arabia to at least 47 people who've had their heads cut off, apparently. This is simultaneous execution of 47 people, 45 Saudis, an Egyptian and someone from Chad. But it's okay, though, because, most of these were allegedly Al-Qaeda terrorists. Not sure if they were good Al-Qaeda terrorists or bad Al-Qaeda terrorists, but it's all okay.
Would they have been Daesh?
No, they were definitely Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda, okay.
Yeah. And this gentleman here, Sir John Jenkins, who of course was, he is the former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, he told the BBC, or he said to the BBC, "Do I think these sentences are justified? Certainly the people accused of membership of Al-Qaeda, particularly given what's happened in the past 18 months with these attacks by Islamic State inside the kingdom, Saudi Arabia, I can understand why the Saudis reacted the way they did." And he went on to say basically what's there, that the Saudi executions are different to Islamic State executions because Saudi is a legitimately constituted state operating in a state system. So it's quite all right if you're a legitimately constituted state.
I find some of this a bit confusing, Mike, because wasn't that the problem with That was the problem
with Assad, for example.
Assad and in Iraq, that you had a state where the state was executing people. That wasn't okay.
No.
But if it's Saudi Arabia, it is okay, and we approve of that because, of course, these people have been through a proper court system and have been judged.
Apparently.
Evidence produced. Great.
Yes, but not to be outdone, Islamic State themselves apparently appearing to show executions. Are they? Once again, we have what looks like green screen staging of what the Wall Street Journal here won't claim is definitely an execution. So not even the Wall Street Journal prepared to say that this is definitely an execution by ISIS. And as we know, there does seem to be some evidence floating around the internet that these so-called executions are filmed in front of green screen, Hollywood style. But anyway, getting back to Saudi Arabia, there seems to be plenty of pressure coming on, which is good. Not only to reveal how they achieved their honoured status on the UN Human Rights Council when they behave in this type of way, but also not mentioned by this article, but also for the release of the 28 redacted pages of the 9/11 report, which seems to describe, allegedly, what Saudi's role was in that particular event. And of course, that was the event that kicked all this stuff off in the first place. So there seems to be a bit of a backlash, perhaps unsurprisingly, following what they did on the 1st of January.
I think people are simply beginning to wake up and see through this thing, Mike.
Yeah.
I couldn't resist tweeting out over the Christmas break this independent headline from some time ago, but David Cameron attempts to defend squalid deal with Saudi Arabia in excruciating interview with Jon Snow. Why would it have been excruciating? Because, of course, David Cameron couldn't possibly have justified the fact that we're dealing with Saudi Arabia in this way. But of course, who's pulling his strings? Big Saudi money. The banks depend on the oil trades, and who controls our prime minister? It's an interesting question. It must take us towards war, which is his favourite hobby.
Well, indeed. Now, this is an interview given by Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, retired, obviously, former Defence Intelligence Agency director. He was fired by Obama after the Defence Intelligence Agency admitted in 2012 assessment that US policy was building up ISIS. So basically Flynn was pointing out that Obama was arming ISIS and so on, and he continues to do so. So this article in the Saker here was originally published on a Russian website, but he's saying here, when I look at what's going on, how things are, I can see that a huge threat hangs over us. The direction in which we're currently moving leads to a widening of the conflict, to a major war. The closer we are to it, the higher the risks, the higher the price, the more limited our choices. So now it's important that we work together, the United States and Russia, to determine whether we can develop more opportunities together to stabilize the situation. Of course, he's absolutely speaking out against Obama's policy, which is to do the absolute opposite, which is Obama's policy is to sideline Russia, not get engaged with Russia in any way. Again, he is once again in this article pointing out that it is the United States that is arming ISIS in the first place. But of course, we don't need to worry because we've got this new website from the Foreign Office, and that's telling us the 5 ways that the global coalition is defeating Daesh. And so everything is perfectly fine. We've got the global coalition tackling the flow of foreign terrorist fighters. No doubt they're putting Lynn Homer in charge of this.
We will be giving Lynn Homer a special mention tomorrow because, of course, she's been made a dame. If you don't know who this lady is, she's the lady who presided over the total collapse of the UK border agency. We're now talking about privatising at least the passport part of the border agency. And the woman who's helped create the chaos necessary to bring in the privatisation, well, she's been made a dame. As you do.
Yes. So anyway, no doubt she'll be put in charge of this. And the Global Coalition is supporting efforts to reconstruct areas liberated from Daesh control, apparently. So that's good. Some nice fat contracts for some fat cats in the City of London and United States, no doubt. The Global Coalition is depriving Daesh of sources of income. I'm not clear whether this is actually a Western image of a bomb or whether it's Russian. But anyway, they're using it. But apparently we're stopping sources of income for Daesh, which is mainly oil, of course.
So are they stopping the oil trade across the Turkish border, Mike? Because I haven't seen a lot about that.
Well, they claim to be in this website, so I suspect Lynn Homer's probably going to be put in charge of that as well. But anyway, we'll move on. The Global Coalition is challenging Daesh's poisonous and false ideology, apparently, and there they all are challenging it there. You can see it. It's quite clear how they're challenging it. And they are supporting local forces through training and by conducting airstrikes to deny Daesh safe haven and prevent Daesh advancement. So that's all very good. I feel much safer having seen that website, Brian.
Good. I'm pleased for you, Mike. So we have the British government sets up a website and then casually it says, well, actually, this is the global coalition. I didn't understand that all the world's countries were part of this coalition.
No, neither
but
did
it
I.
is a global coalition, according to David Cameron. Okay, well, that's good.
But moving on then, Putin has published his new national security strategy for 2016. This is an update of the Russian national security strategy, the first since 2009, I believe. And it begins by saying the strategy is a key strategic planning document that establishes the national interests and strategic national profiles of the Russian Federation and home and foreign policy goals, targets and measures directed at strengthening national security and ensuring the country's stable long-term development. And so they're talking about various things, including the position of Russia as against other nation states. It's couched in the language of international politics. So for one of the headlines, for example, is forming a new polycentric world order. So they're talking about world order, but it's interesting that they're talking about rather than a new world order, which is based on a single form of governance. They're talking about nation states effectively. And they're talking about the role of force, relations with NATO and bloc approach. And they're saying expanding the force potential of NATO and endowing it with global functions which are implemented in violation of international legal norms. The bloc's military activation, its continued expansion and the approach of its military infrastructure to Russian borders all create a threat to national security. So they're really pointing out once again how they feel about what's going on with the sort of drive towards global governance based on around the United Nations and so on. They're particularly singling out colour revolutions as being one of the main threats to Russia's security. And the document says that the practice of overthrowing legitimate political authorities, provoking internal stability and conflict is becoming more widespread, in addition to the still existing areas of instability in the Middle East and the Far East. In Africa and South Asia and the Korean Peninsula, new hotspots have appeared and territory not controlled by any government authority has expanded. And so, they are making their position absolutely clear on these issues. That, of course, is why they kicked Soros's NGOs out of Russia before the
I just made a note on that, Mike. Colour Revolutions is Soros's Open Society, and these are the non-governmental organisations and the so-called charity, the third sector, which is being used to destabilise overseas nation states. Once again, we'll say, if you haven't read it, have a look on the UK column website for the article on the BBC's own charity, Media Action, which boasts of its ability to get into countries such as Syria, for example, and to help destabilise the national governments. Quite remarkable. It's hidden in plain sight, I suppose, is the answer, Mike. Well, of course, whilst the drive for war goes on, David Cameron has been standing in front of Christmas trees, and he's been telling the British public that actually we've got to stop appeasing those nasty Islamic extremists. That's the nasty ones as opposed to the good ones, Mike. It is confusing. But David Cameron says stop appeasing the Islamic extremists, and the whole country's got to be loyal to British values. Now, of course, these are David Cameron specified British values, which we've covered a few of them because they're helping to create wars. They're dealing with the corrupt international banks. Dealing means financial dealings as opposed to any sanctions. But you've got to follow David Cameron because he is the man who is pushing out the British values. And of course, his Cabinet Office will have been approving the honours given. So let's have a look at one of David Cameron's British values. Well, here she is, because it's Jacqueline Gold, who is the boss of the Ann Summers sex shops, and she's been given the CBE. So she's been given an honour. This is a British value, and of course, what has she done? Well, apart from importing millions of sex toys, she's also been donating to the Conservatives. So just so that our international audience has got this clear, follow David Cameron. And if you donate to the Tory party, let's bring him in again, here he is, then he is going to honour you. It's a good system, Mike, isn't it? I'm proud as a former military officer to be living in a country where David Cameron's values, which are giving honours to people running sex shops, this is clearly the priority. Well, somebody else has picked up on this, because the Telegraph here saying that British patriotism is a loyalty rooted in democratic heritage. Brilliant headline, that, because what it's really saying is if you don't agree with the government line, then you're not loyal, you're not a patriot. You must agree with David Cameron. Presumably you must support the Ann Summers sex shop. That goes hand in hand. Few people a bit cautious. People who Mr. Cameron does not mean to target with his agenda could be caught up in it because they fail to measure up to standards of political correctness. So interesting that even in this Telegraph article, we're beginning to get a little hint. So there's a few journalists working out there's something nasty in the shadows. It's pretty incredible stuff, though. Well, who can we rely on? Obviously, to look after freedoms. Clearly, that's got to be the church, and in particular, the Christian church. And just before Christmas, of course, we just pointed out that Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, was on a big drive really for the Christian church. Well, let's sort of remind ourselves of the sort of thing he has been getting up to. Here is Mr. Welby meeting up with your friend, Mark Carnage, as you like to call him, from the Bank of England. And clearly, Justin Welby is pulling over the tables of the money lenders, or is he queuing up at the table for his glass of champagne with them? Well, why were we interested? We were interested because, of course, Justin Welby had been working with the Wolf Foundation in a report which was clearly undermining his own Christian church. So the Wolf Foundation had set up a commission, and the findings of the commission were that Britain was no longer a Christian country and Christianity should be pulled out of the constitution, really. So we were a bit confused as to what Mr. Welby would be up to, but the latest headlines in another area have meant that we're even more confused as to what this man is up to. Just have a look at this. Telegraph once again, the silencing of Christians in the public sector. And it says that senior civil servant has come forward to say he's desperately worried that Christianity is now under such attack, people daren't mention it if you're working within Westminster. A spirit of secularism is at work, apparently. Well, where have these words come from? This is the man, William Nye. He's the new Church of England Secretary General. And what is he going to be doing? Well, he's going to be getting rid of red tape as part of the drive to win people back into the church. I thought bringing people into the Christian church, Mike, was to do with applying Christianity, which was love and compassion for people. But he's there, he's going to remove red tape and get people back into the church. And presumably he's going to be working on this bit of red tape, which is the church's financial arm is planning to open up parts of its 6.7 billion endowment fund to help expansion plans. What do you make of that? Seems pretty commercial language.
Helping the homeless, no doubt.
Well, if they've had 6.7 billion tucked away for a few years, presumably they could have helped the homeless and we wouldn't have any. We'll pause.
Yeah.
Well, who is this man? Well, this is where it gets very interesting. Let's bring him in because he's some civil servant. This man used to be the director for the National Security Secretariat. And if you don't know what that is, we need to bring in this man, Sir Mark Lyle Grant, who's now the National Security Advisor. And he just happened to be ex-president of the UN Security Council, which traduced ISIS. Now, I had to look this interesting word up. It means basically undermined them, demeaned them. But the boss of the National Security Advice section for the British government is, of course, a big wheel for the UN Security Council.
Sure that wasn't a typo? They didn't mean introduced ISIS?
No, traduced is the word. Okay. So they've been demeaned, and it did say ISIS, so I don't know whether this would be the good ISIS or bad ISIS, or in fact they mean Daesh. But why would the Church of England need a man buried in British security? We don't know. So, of course, who's the big boss? Well, it's David Cameron, and there he is in front of his Christmas tree, presumably festooned with sex toys. And another big name, Charles Farr, chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee. And, of course, all of this is run under the Cabinet Office. What do they get up to? Well, they look at source assessments on for national security and foreign policy. He originally came from OSCT, the Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism. And of course, this is the Home Office body that set up the PREVENT strategy, which many people, including senior London police, are saying is actually helping create terrorism instead of preventing it. But if you want to know where the police are in the level of this, they're way down at the bottom. So Mr. William James Nye, now working with the Church of England, but his background heavily into the dark arts of British security. I'll just fill in the rest of this picture because the subcommittees cover everything: threats, hazards, contingencies, nuclear deterrence, cyber security, which we'll come on to in a minute, counter-terrorism, and the Strategic Defence Review. So just the man that the Church of England would need, Mike, do you think?
Did you not say earlier he had something to do with Prince Charles as well?
Well, yeah, just happens to have been lead secretary, private personal secretary for Prince Charles. So it appears that Prince Charles, who I think was the man who said we need to sort of push Christian faith to one side and introduce broad faiths, is going to bring his man into the Church of England. Do you think his job is to collapse the Church of England? Possibly.
Possibly. I think it's doing a good job on its own, mind you.
I think it probably is. Well, let's have a look at another man who was there central to that little organisation, Charles Farr. Now, we picked up a bit of information from The Guardian here because a few people have looked at him and said, who is this man? Basically, he's been an ambassador, and now, although he's described as what is apparently a grey, faceless avatar, this man is deep in British intelligence and security. Why would we be interested in him? Well, apparently, according to the Times in 2012, in his early days, he was flying around Afghanistan in a helicopter with thousands of dollars in bundles, doing deals with farmers to not grow opium. But I believe that we've shown some pretty convincing graphs that, of course, the opium crops were doing the opposite and flourishing during this period, Mike.
If this man was dropping money from a helicopter in order to convince farmers to not grow opium, of course, alongside that were the leaflets from the British Army telling farmers that we totally understand you've got to make a living, and we totally agree that, or we totally understand that opium is the main cash crop that you grow. So go right ahead. So I think that what's actually happened here is that this man has dropped money on the heads of these people in order to help finance the growing of that opium in the first place.
Okay, well, before we take him off the screen, of course, we'll just point out that he's apparently also had a relationship. I think that means he's been in bed with a lady called Fiona Cunningham, special advisor to Theresa May, special relationship.
It's all very incestuous.
Very incestuous. So the man who's providing security advice just does it, on the pillow, basically. Okay, no worries there. But unfortunately, this is the gentleman also who took the initial Quillam report, which was talking about extremism, Islamic extremism in UK. Let's bring him in again. Here he is, Mr. Farr. And Quillam was the organisation. And of course, this brings him in close to EDL leader Tommy Robinson, who mysteriously was tied up with the BBC and the Quillam organisation. This is pretty, as you've said, incestuous stuff, Mike. We've got people in British security and intelligence telling us that every Muslim wants to murder us in our bed, setting the policy, and yet we have no idea really where these people come from, what their views and values are. Well, we just remind people that, of course, Alex Jones was promoting Tommy Robinson fairly recently. We're not sure why he was doing this, but we think that maybe Mr. Jones needs to do a little bit of deeper research into the connections between Tommy Robinson and the BBC and Quillam, and it would appear British intelligence. But we'll see where that goes. So just to give a reminder, remember, of course, that Malcolm Rifkin was removed as chairman of the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Committee. A little bit of trouble with a few Chinese companies, apparently. Big organisation. You'll see why we need to keep this in the public domain at the moment, because we need to know what these people are doing in the background. And we pointed out, we should remember, of course, that the whole thing is headed by David Cameron, who has professed his loyalty, or declared his loyalty to Israel over and above UK. So, of course, Rifkin's out and Dominic Grieve is in, another barrister brought into the thing, and Philip Hammond replaces
Wicked Willie
as Foreign Secretary. And there's the headline: David Cameron pledges his unshakable support for Israel. So he's not working for British values at all, Mike.
So it seems.
Okay. Well, what have these people got in store for us in 2016? Well, they're going to put more people in prison. And thank you very much to our viewer who pulled this out. Social media bosses face 2 years in jail if they warn users MI5 is watching them, after ministers lose patience with the tech giants. So we've got international companies. They're not doing as David Cameron wants. And what's going to happen is apparently bosses at Twitter and Google are going to be put in prison.
I'll believe that one when I see it.
Well, maybe, but preferable to having their hands chopped off, of course. It gets better because the Mail here came out with this one, time to dump passwords. They're too weak. They're a breach of cybersecurity. And it said that experts were calling for the use of fingerprints to make us safer online. Well, who was calling for this? It was the accountancy firm KPMG. We did a little bit of research. It took about 30 seconds to discover that their man was David Fabracci. And what is his background? Well, it just happens to be UK Ministry of Defence. So I think maybe, Mike, what's going on here is that Ministry of Defence, British government policy, is being slipped in via the back door in KPMG. And if you don't think that's possible, well, just have a look at a budget that these people are working to, because according to the government's own information, they've got £860 million, nearly £1 billion allocated from 2011 to strengthen UK cyber security. I think that means spying on us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who's the man driving it? Well, it's none other than Oliver Letwin. This is the man controlling Conservative policy, controlling the Conservative Party, and controlling effectively the British government. We've warned about this. Interesting to see that the Mirror picked up on the 30th of December, and they got hold of a leaked document, a released document from about 30 years ago, where Oliver Letwin was basically saying, never mind the policy that white people have had to live in for years, it's the attitude of black people that's wrong.
Was this one of the documents Letwin was trying to throw in a bin at the time?
No, he was throwing away defence documents at the time. Anybody else, certainly military people, would have been on a pretty severe charge or been in prison. He was simply throwing the documents away in the waste bin of a London park. What these documents reveal, as the Mirror says, is a pretty vicious racist attitude at the very heart of the Conservative administration. This is the man, former NM Rothschild employee, with a pretty despicable view on people who are not white. And we'll just remind people once again the power of this man buried in the Cabinet Office, and the very same man who wrote a book, Privatising the World. I think that included the NHS itself, Mike.
Yes.
Where do we go from that? Money,
I suppose. Because, it's Happy New Year from the banking sector as well, as the brave new world of bail-in comes into force. This EU bail-in policy came into force on the 1st of January. And this is Hugo Dixon writing this in Reuters. He's a columnist. And wrote a book, The In-Out Question Why Britain Should Stay in the EU and Fight to Make It Better. Well, I don't quite agree with that, but anyway, he's making the point that the European Union has entered a brave new world of bank bail-ins. At the start of 2016, Europe has wasted so much taxpayers' money on bailing out bust banks in recent years that it's right to try to get investors to help foot the bills in future. However, this tough new regime carries big political risks, and he goes on to talk about the difference between bailout and bail-in, and really suggesting that bail-in is such a great thing that we don't need to worry, because it's only people that are either investors in the banks or people that have uninsured deposits with the banks that are going to suffer from this. So we don't need to worry, because anybody with more than €100,000 in their bank account will be fully insured. That's a pile of nonsense. Everybody knows that's a pile of nonsense. There isn't enough money in these insurance schemes to cover that in the event of a large bank failure. And really the point that's being made by many people now is that 2016 is looking very much like 2007. This is Market Oracle running a forecast by Graham Summers called The EU's Banking System Will Crash in 2016. And he's really pointing out that negative interest rates and expanding quantitative easing by the European Central Bank, which is now leveraged to 26 to 1, and this is the amount of debt that's being carried, and that really rivals what was going on with Wall Street banks at the end of 2007. And this is a sentiment being echoed by many others, including Liam Halligan here, saying another Lehman collapse is the biggest threat we face. He's talking about the economy in general, but really pointing out how it's the banking system that is of greatest concern, because of course the banking system was never sorted out after the 2008 crash. We've been trying to make this point for a long time now, Brian, and mainstream media covering this sort of thing as well. In the meantime, of course, the less aware among the mainstream media blaming China for everything. China's manufacturing worsens in December, according to a survey. This is the 10th consecutive month of contraction, with the world's largest economy set to post its weakest growth in a quarter of a century, according to, I guess this is AFP. And this is the Caxton Purchasing Managers Index, which tracks activity in the factory and workshop sector. Now, of course, China being blamed for this, but as we've said many times, this is nothing to do with China. China's economy mainly an export economy. So what we're saying here is a reflection of the Western economy, and we can see other evidence for this. For example, the collapse in demand from Western economies, causing the container ships to be mothballed in increasing numbers, the demand for oil being so low that the price falling, as we very well know. But we continue to see blame being placed on China. So we've had a pretty significant stock market collapse today. FTSE down 2.5% when I was looking. The Dow Jones down 1%. The Nikkei down 3%. The DAX down 3%. The CAC down 2%. And of course, the Chinese stock market, this is the graph, being blamed for this. And in fact, the Chinese protection that they have, this new protection that they have, where they see the stock market in China collapsing at a big rate, they will stop trading, and that happened this morning. But as we can see, the fall that has happened today was relatively insignificant compared to the stuff that was going on in the middle of the year. And of course, a lot of this activity in the Chinese stock market being caused by external influences. This sort of the Soros effect again. So China being blamed. The problem is not a Chinese problem. It is a Western financial system, a Western economic problem.
Well, if I can just add here, Mike, there was, we'll call it a circular letter from one of the major banks came around. I can't remember which one. I'll check up on it. But what it was basically saying was that your assets previously guaranteed at £85,000, that was now being reduced to £75,000.
Right, so that was announced back in October, and basically this was the UK's version of the deposit guarantee scheme, and the reason that they gave for reducing this amount was because of EU legislation which caps deposit guarantees at €100,000, and because the exchange rate had changed, they said they had to reduce the amount from 85,000 to 70,000.
Pretty convenient. Yes. Well, those letters are now coming around to the public, and as the person with me said, this doesn't look good. No, it doesn't look good. It's looking very bad. There are no solutions to the banking collapse, which is about to hit us, other than breaking up the banks once and for all and getting rid of this too big to fail. It's something which was never done. But instead of doing that, what we've seen, particularly in the last 3 months, has been increased propaganda to tell us what great guys the banks are. And this began really with Mark Carnage's public event that he held at the Bank of England a couple of months ago, where they were basically trying to tell us it's quite all right, everything's passed, everything's sorted out, the banks are doing the right things. And we shouldn't be nasty to them anyway. No, we shouldn't be. We should be nice to them. Okay. I guess it's Happy New Year from David Cameron as well. We've mentioned quite a lot of David Cameron, but of course the EU referendum PSYOP continues, and we're being hit hard with it once again. A big article from Chatham House on the BBC today on this very issue. What are the big challenges facing Europe? And of course it begins by talking about the EU referendum. Apparently it's going to be a year of revelations, Brian. In a number of areas, 2016 could be the year when international affairs begin at last to stabilise after the rollercoaster ride of unexpected crises since 2014. And it's going to begin with the resolving of Brexit. And it's possible that the British people, according to Robin Nisbet here,
It's possible that the British people could get a vote as early as June on whether the country should remain in the EU or leave. This will be a seminal moment, not just for the UK, but for the EU as a whole. And of course, we've been forecasting what is going to happen here for quite some time now, because what we're going to have is the result of the vote will stay in the European Union, but the price of that and the price of the renegotiation is going to be, for example, the European Army.
Well, privatisation of British border controls, that's pretty easy to see where that one goes, because that allows integration with the EU to be done under the radar and even quicker. We've got the demise of the British Armed Forces, we've got the rise of the paramilitary British police, and as we've shown in today's programme, we've got a massive increase in state surveillance. So welcome to Britain, which must be one of the lead countries for spying on its citizens. So I think David Cameron's done a good job in his time that he's been in, Mike. All the people who voted Conservative must be pretty pleased with the results they've got.
Hope so.
I hope so. Well, don't be shy. If you would like to help the British economy and win an award at the same time, then probably the best thing to do is to open up a sex shop, and you can be sure that David Cameron and his Conservative Party will give you full support. I think that's a good start for 2016. A mention for Ian Crane.
Yes, Crane Report and Fracking Nightmare on tonight, so 7:30 ukcolumn.org/live. Hope to see you there.
And I presume that Ian Crane will be mentioning the fact that he had a little altercation with Devon and Cornwall Special Branch. I think they identified themselves as a little bit unhappy that he's speaking out on fracking. Well, this is the situation in Britain today. If you don't agree with David Cameron, presumably we can all expect a little visit from the secret police. Well, there we are, 2016. Welcome to Britain, welcome to the new year. We'll be back same time tomorrow with an update on what's happening. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.